Cyrus Malindi always got up at 6:30 in the morning, took a shower for exactly 15 minutes, and went down to breakfast at 7. In 23 years of marriage, this ritual had never been broken. Vesta knew her husband's habits by heart and could make his morning coffee with her eyes closed. 2 spoons of sugar, a drop of milk, no foam. He would sit down at the table, unfold the newspaper, and silently scan the stock market reports until he finished his cup. This morning began as usual. Vesta was standing at the coffee machine with her back to the stairs when she heard her husband's familiar footsteps. She didn't turn around, continuing to stir the coffee in his favorite blue cup, the one he had brought back from a business trip to Chicago 5 years ago. Vesta remembered how proud he was of that trip, talking about new dry cleaning contracts for a large hotel chain. "Good morning, dear," Cyrus said, sitting down at his place at the table. "Good morning," Vesta replied, placing the cup in front of him. Her voice was steady, without the slightest tremor. She sat down opposite him with her own cup of tea and opened a gardening magazine. Cyrus opened the latest issue of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and immersed himself in reading. Vesta glanced at him occasionally over the pages of her magazine, watching him sip his coffee as usual. First sip, second, third. He was reading an article about falling real estate prices in the suburbs, sometimes frowning or shaking his head. 10 minutes passed. Cyrus had read halfway through the newspaper when he suddenly froze. The cup slipped from his hands and fell with a dull thud onto the table, spilling the remains of coffee onto the white tablecloth. Vesta looked up from her magazine. "What's wrong?" she asked, folding the magazine. Cyrus tried to say something, but instead of words, a strangled wheeze escaped from his throat. His face turned red, then took on a strange bluish tint. He grabbed his throat with his hands, trying to breathe. "Cyrus!" Vesta exclaimed, jumping up from her seat. She walked around the table and tried to support her husband, but he was already sliding from his chair to the floor. His body was convulsing, his eyes rolled back. Vesta grabbed the phone and dialed the emergency number. Her voice trembled as she explained to the dispatcher what was happening. "Ambulance! My husband is choking. He fell. Address, Peachtree Street, 512. Please hurry." She knelt down next to Cyrus and tried to turn him on his side, as she had once seen in a movie. His breathing became irregular and shallow. Vesta stroked his head, saying something soothing, although she herself did not understand what she was saying. The ambulance arrived 8 minutes later. 2 paramedics, a young African-American woman and a gray-haired man, quickly assessed Cyrus's condition and began resuscitation. They injected him with some kind of drug, connected an oxygen mask, and transferred him to a stretcher. "What's wrong with him?" Vesta asked, following the stretcher to the ambulance. "It's unclear at this point," replied the gray-haired paramedic. "Possibly a heart attack or poisoning. He needs to be taken to the hospital immediately." Vesta got into the car next to the stretcher. Cyrus lay motionless, his face waxy. She took his hand in hers. His skin was cold and clammy. At the hospital, Cyrus was immediately taken to intensive care. Vesta remained in the hallway, clutching her purse. She called her husband's work, informed his secretary of the incident, and asked her to cancel all his appointments for the day. Then she called her office and warned them that she would not be able to come in. The doctor appeared half an hour later. Dr. Patel, a tall Hindu man with sad eyes, sat down next to Vesta on a plastic chair. "Mrs. Malindi, I'm very sorry. Your husband has passed away. We did everything we could, but—" Vesta felt the world around her slow down. The doctor's words sounded as if they were coming from far away, through a thick layer of water. How could this happen?" she whispered. "We don't know the exact cause of death yet. The symptoms point to possible poisoning, but an autopsy will be needed to determine the exact cause. I called the police. It's standard procedure in cases like this." Vesta nodded, not trusting her voice. The doctor left her alone, and she sat in the hospital corridor, staring at the white walls and feeling a strange emptiness growing inside her. Not grief, just emptiness. Detective Zara Obenga arrived at the hospital an hour after Cyrus's death. She was a woman of medium height, with short hair and attentive brown eyes. She was wearing a strict dark blue suit and carrying a notebook and pen. "Mrs. Malindi?" she addressed Vesta. "I'm Detective Obenga from the Atlanta Police Department. My condolences." "Thank you," Vesta replied quietly. "I need to ask you a few questions about what happened this morning. I understand this is a difficult time for you, but the sooner we gather the information, the better." Vesta recounted how the day had started normally, how Cyrus had been eating breakfast, and how he had suddenly started choking. The detective listened attentively, occasionally taking notes in her notebook. "Had your husband been complaining of feeling unwell in recent days?" Obenga asked. "No, he felt fine. Maybe a little tired, but he has a lot of work right now." "Any heart problems? Was he taking any medication?" "No health problems. He didn't even take vitamins." The detective wrote something else down, then looked up. "We'll need to examine your home, the place where the incident occurred. This is also standard procedure." "Of course," Vesta agreed. They drove to Malindi's house in 2 cars. Vesta drove her white Toyota, and the detective followed her in her official vehicle. The house on Peachtree Street was a sturdy 2-story red brick building with a neat lawn and rose beds that Vesta took care of. Cyrus's open newspaper still lay on the kitchen table, next to his blue cup with dried coffee drops. A brown stain on the tablecloth was a reminder of what had happened here a few hours earlier. Detective Obenga slowly walked around the kitchen, studying the surroundings. She looked in the refrigerator, checked the trash can, and examined the coffee maker. "Who made the coffee this morning?" she asked. "I did. I always do," Vesta replied. "Cyrus doesn't know how to use the machine." "What about breakfast?" "He didn't eat breakfast, just coffee in the morning." Obenga picked up the blue cup, sniffed it, then carefully placed it in a plastic bag. "I'll need to take this cup for analysis, as well as any leftover coffee if there is any." "There should be some left in the coffee machine," said Vesta. The detective took the leftovers as well. She photographed the kitchen from different angles, measured distances, and wrote down details in her notebook. Vesta stood by the window, looking out at the yard where Cyrus mowed the lawn on Saturdays. "Mrs. Malindi, tell me about your marriage," the detective asked. "Were there any problems between you and your husband?" "No, not at all. We lived together for 23 years. Of course, we had arguments like all married couples, but nothing serious." "Financial difficulties?" "No. Cyrus has his own business, a dry cleaners, and things are going well. I work as an accountant at a law firm. We live modestly, but with dignity." The detective nodded, continuing to take notes. Vesta noticed how closely she studied her face as she answered, as if looking for something in her expression. "Did your husband have any enemies? Business rivals? Anyone who might have wanted to harm him?" "I don't think so. Cyrus ran an honest business and didn't cheat anyone. He had competitors, but they were all within the normal business framework." Obenha looked around the rest of the house. The living room, Cyrus's office, their bedroom. In the office, she stopped at the desk, which was covered with business papers and a calendar with notes. "I'll take some documents for review," she said. "I'll also need a list of your husband's contacts, colleagues, friends, relatives." "He has a nephew, Stiller," Vesta recalled. "His late sister's son. They saw each other from time to time." "His phone number?" "I'll find it in Cyrus's notebook." Vesta found the worn notebook in the desk drawer and showed the detective the page she wanted. The examination lasted almost 2 hours. When the detective finished, she sat down across from Vesta at the same table where Cyrus had had breakfast that morning. "Mrs. Malindi, the autopsy results will be ready in a few days. Until then, your husband's body will remain in the morgue. I will keep you informed." When can I arrange the funeral?" "After all the procedures are complete. It usually takes 3 to 5 days." The detective gathered her things and headed for the exit. At the door, she turned around. One more question. Did you have coffee this morning too? No, I only drink tea. I've never liked coffee. I see. See you later, Mrs. Melindy. Vesta walked the detective to her car and closed the door behind her. The house fell silent. She went into the kitchen and stood for a long time, staring at the empty place at the table where Cyrus always sat. The tablecloth with the coffee stain was still on the table. Vesta took it off and put it in the washing machine. The next day, Detective Obenga returned to the Melindy house at exactly 10 o'clock in the morning. Vesta greeted her in a black dress that accentuated the paleness of her face. Her hair was neatly pulled back in a bun, her makeup barely noticeable. The image of a grieving widow was convincing. "Good morning, Mrs. Melindy. How are you feeling?" asked the detective, sitting down on the floral upholstered sofa in the living room. "How can you feel after something like this?" Vesta replied quietly, taking a seat opposite her. "I still can't believe that Kiros is gone." Obenga took out a tape recorder and placed it on the coffee table between them. "I would like to record our conversation if you don't mind. I need to know more about your husband, about your relationship. It will help us understand what happened." Vesta nodded, folding her hands in her lap. The detective turned on the recorder and stated the date, time, and names of those present. "Tell me how you met your husband," Obenga began. "It was 25 years ago," Vesta began, a warm note of nostalgia creeping into her voice. "I had just finished college and was working as a junior accountant at a small firm. Cyrus had just opened his first dry cleaning shop on Martin Luther King Drive. He brought a business suit in to be cleaned, and we got to talking. He seemed so serious and determined to me. A week later, he asked me to the movies. When did you get married?" 2 years later. It was a small wedding, just our closest friends and family. Neither Cyrus nor I had large families. He lost his parents early, and I only had my mother, who died 3 years ago. The detective made notes in her notebook, occasionally looking up at Vesta. "Did you have any children?" "No." Vesta lowered her gaze for a moment. "We tried for the first few years, but it didn't work out. And then we just got used to living together. Cyrus was very dedicated to his work, developing his business. Now he has 5 dry cleaners throughout Atlanta." "How would you describe your marriage? Were there any problems?" "We were happy," Vesta replied without hesitation. "Of course, Cyrus worked a lot and sometimes came home late, but that's understandable. Running your own business takes time. We rarely argued and had plans for the future together." "What plans?" "Cyrus wanted to sell the business in a few years and buy a house somewhere in Florida. He said he was tired of the hustle and bustle of the city, and I dreamed of a big garden. I've always loved flowers." Obenga wrote something else down, then looked at Vesta intently. "Mrs. Melindy, do you know if your husband made a will?" "Yes, of course. We both have wills. We drew them up 10 years ago when we bought this house. It's very simple. In the event of the death of one of us, all property passes to the other." "Is it a significant amount of property?" "The house is worth about $400,000, and Cyrus's business is valued at approximately $2 million, plus savings, investments, probably about $2.5 million in total." Vesta said this amount calmly, as if she were talking about the price of groceries at the store. "Are there any debts?" "A small mortgage with only a year left to pay, no other serious obligations." The detective closed her notebook and turned off the recorder. "Thank you for the information, Mrs. Melindy. I need to talk to people who knew your husband. Can you give me the contact details of his closest colleagues?" Vesta dictated the names and phone numbers of the dry cleaning chain manager and the chief accountant. She also named several of Cyrus's friends and neighbors with whom they socialized. After the detective left, Vesta was alone in the silence of the large house. She walked through the rooms, mechanically straightening the pillows on the sofa and dusting the shelves. In Cyrus's study, she stopped at his chair and ran her hand over the leather back. On the table lay the business papers he had been reviewing on the last evening of his life. Meanwhile, Detective Obenga headed to the addresses Vesta had given her. Her first stop was the dry cleaner's office on Peachtree Street, a few blocks from Melindy's house. Manager Terrence Cooper met the detective in a small office above one of the drop-off points. He was a man of about 45, with a neat beard and tired eyes. He had been working with Cyrus for 8 years. "I can't believe Mr. Melindy is dead," he said, shaking his head. "He called yesterday morning to discuss plans for the week, and today—" "How did he seem lately?" Obenga asked. "Normal. Maybe a little more pensive than usual. In the last 2 months, he started coming into the office less often and working more from home. He said he wanted to delegate more responsibilities. Did he have any enemies? Any business conflicts?" "No, Mr. Melindy was a very honest man. With customers, with suppliers, with us, his employees. I never heard anyone complain about him." "What about family matters? Did he talk about his wife, about problems at home?" Cooper paused, clearly thinking about his answer. "You know, in recent months he did seem preoccupied with something personal, but Mr. Melindy wasn't the kind of person who discussed his private life at work. At most, he would ask how my family was doing, but he never talked about his own problems." "What do you mean by preoccupied?" "Well, he started staying late at the office more often, even though he used to always go home by 6. Sometimes I'd find him at his computer at a time when he would normally already be home. And recently, I saw him talking on the phone very quietly, almost in a whisper. When I walked into the office, he quickly ended the conversation." The detective wrote down these observations and asked for the contact details of other employees who knew Cyrus well. The next stop was the home of Melindy's neighbors, the Johnsons, who lived across the street. Mrs. Deborah Johnson, an elderly woman with gray hair, met the detective on the porch of her house. "Oh, what a tragedy," she exclaimed, clasping her hands. "Cyrus was such a good neighbor. He always helped if something needed to be fixed, and in the winter he cleared our sidewalk of snow." "How often did you interact with the Melindy family?" "We saw each other almost every day. Vesta tended to her roses in the mornings, and I went out to water my flowers. We exchanged a few words. And Cyrus mowed the lawn on Saturdays, and my husband and I sometimes chatted with him over the fence." "Did they seem like a happy couple?" Mrs. Johnson thought for a moment. "You know, they were always very polite to each other. I never heard them yell or argue, but I didn't notice any particular closeness either. They lived like roommates, politely, neatly, but without any particular warmth." "Have you noticed anything unusual in their behavior lately?" "Now that you ask, Cyrus has been coming home later than usual for the past few weeks. His car used to appear in the driveway around 6 in the evening, but lately it's been closer to 8 or even 9. And also," she lowered her voice, "I've seen him sitting in his car in front of the house several times, not getting out for 10 or 15 minutes, as if he was thinking about something." After talking to the neighbors, the detective went to the law firm Harris and Partners, where Vesta worked. The office was located on the 20th floor of a modern building in downtown Atlanta. Vesta's colleagues, 3 other accountants and the office manager, gathered in the conference room to talk to the detective. They all expressed their condolences and surprise at Cyrus's sudden death. "Vesta is a very private person," said senior accountant Cynthia Williams. "She does her job very well, but she almost never talks about her personal life. All I know is that she is married and that her husband runs a dry cleaning business." "Did she seem happy in her marriage?" asked Obenga. "It's hard to say. Vesta rarely shows any emotion. Even when she talks about her husband, she's very reserved. Not cold, but without much enthusiasm." "Has she taken any time off lately? Maybe because of family problems?" "No. Vesta is very punctual. In all the time I've known her, she's been sick for 3 or 4 days a year at most." Meanwhile, Vesta was getting ready to go to her family lawyer. She changed into a more formal suit, grabbed her briefcase with her documents, and got into her Toyota. Rashida and Como's law office was located in an old building in the historic center of Atlanta. Rashida was an elegant woman, in her mid-40s with attentive eyes and a calm voice. She had been handling the Melindy family's affairs for many years, arranging the purchase of their home, drafting wills, and helping with tax issues. Vesta, please accept my deepest condolences, said the lawyer, hugging her client. I was shocked to hear about Cyrus's death. Thank you, Rashida. I need to sort out the paperwork, the inheritance. The police say I'll have to wait a few days, but I want to be ready. Of course, I understand. Have a seat. I'll get your file. Rashida opened a thick folder containing the Malindi family's documents. As you remember, your wills are mutual. Each of you inherits all of the other's property. There is also life insurance for $500,000. Yes, I remember. What documents will I need to process the inheritance? The death certificate, when it's issued. Your marriage certificate. Cyrus's will. All the property will also need to be appraised for tax purposes. Vesta nodded, listening carefully to the lawyer's explanations. By the way, Rashida continued, Cyrus called me last week. He said he wanted to discuss some changes to the will. We agreed to meet, but unfortunately, it didn't happen because of what happened. Changes? Vesta asked, trying to keep her voice calm. What changes? He didn't specify on the phone. He just said he wanted to review some items, perhaps regarding charity or relatives. Kairos only has one nephew, Stiller. Yes, I know. Perhaps he wanted to include him in the will, but these are only assumptions. We will never know for sure. Vesta spent about an hour at the lawyer's office discussing the formalities of inheritance. When she stepped outside, the sun was already setting. Atlanta was going about its usual business. Cars honking in traffic, people rushing along the sidewalks, music playing in cafes. Vesta got into her car and sat motionless for a while, thinking about Rashida's words about changes to the will. Cyrus hadn't said anything to her about it. What could he have been planning? And why hadn't he discussed it with her, as he always did when making important decisions? She started the car and drove home, where an empty house and silence, which had now become a constant companion in her days, awaited her. Vesta woke up on Thursday morning with a heavy head and a feeling of unreality. It was the third day without Cyrus. The house seemed too big and too quiet. She made herself some tea and sat down at the kitchen table, in the very spot where her husband always had breakfast. The morning light fell on the tabletop, illuminating the place where his blue cup had stood until recently. The phone rang at exactly 9 in the morning. The display showed the name Rashida Nkomo. Vesta, good morning. Can you come to my office today? I need to discuss an important matter with you regarding Cyrus's will. Has something happened? A note of alarm appeared in Vesta's voice. It's better to talk when we meet. It won't take long. Okay, I'll be there in an hour. Vesta put on the same black suit she had worn the day before, carefully fixed her hair in front of the mirror, and headed to the lawyer's office. On the way, she tried to imagine what it could be about. Perhaps some documents had been found that needed to be signed, or maybe there were problems with taxes. Rashida met her in her office with a serious expression on her face. On the table lay the familiar folder with the Malindi family's documents, but next to it was another, completely new folder. Vesta, please sit down, said the lawyer, pointing to the chair opposite her desk. What I have to tell you may come as a shock. I'm listening, Vesta replied, trying to remain calm. Kairos came to see me last night. It was Tuesday, the day before what happened. He asked for an urgent meeting and made changes to his will. Vesta felt something break inside her, but her face remained impassive. What changes? Rashida opened a new folder and took out several documents. Cyrus changed his primary heir. Now all his property, his house, business, savings, insurance, goes to his nephew, Stiller Kufo. The silence in the office became deafening. Vesta sat motionless, staring at the documents on the table. The lawyer's words echoed in her head like an echo in an empty room. Everything? She asked quietly. Everything, except for the $10,000 he left you for initial expenses. The house you live in now belongs to Stiller. Vesta closed her eyes, trying to comprehend what she had heard. 23 years of marriage, 23 years of living together, and in the end, $10,000. Less than her car was worth. "Why?" she asked, opening her eyes. "Did he explain why he made that decision?" Rashida awkwardly adjusted her glasses. Cyrus seemed very determined, but at the same time upset. He said he had reason to believe that your marriage was not what he had imagined it to be. What does that mean? He didn't go into details. He only mentioned that he had recently learned some things about your behavior that changed his attitude toward the marriage. He said he couldn't trust you with his inheritance. Vesta felt a wave of rage rise in her chest. She clenched her hands into fists, her nails digging into her palms. "What things about my behavior? I've been a devoted wife for 23 years. Vesta, I understand how painful this is. But the documents were signed in the presence of witnesses. Everything was done according to the law. I was obligated to inform you of the changes." "What about Stiller? Does he know?" "Not yet. Cyrus asked me to wait until after his death to notify him. I was planning to contact him next week." Vesta slowly rose from her chair, picked up her purse, and headed for the door. "Vesta, wait. We need to discuss the formalities." "Later," Vesta said without turning around. "I need time to think this through." She left the lawyer's office and got into her car. Her hands trembled as she inserted the key into the ignition. All these years she had been planning for the future, counting on her inheritance, and now she had nothing but $10,000 and an accounting job that barely covered her daily expenses. Cyrus knew. Somehow he had found out about her plans or suspected something. But what exactly? Vesta was sure she had behaved impeccably. No suspicious purchases, no strange phone calls, no traces of her activities. Meanwhile, Detective Obenga continued her investigation at the forensic laboratory. The test results she received that morning confirmed her suspicions. Potassium cyanide, toxicologist Dr. Ahmed Salim told her. The concentration in the victim's blood indicates that she took a significant dose shortly before her death. How long would it take for death to occur? At that concentration, between 15 and 30 minutes, the symptoms would have appeared almost immediately after consumption. And in coffee, can the taste of cyanide be masked? Cyanide has a characteristic bitter almond smell, but not everyone can detect it. In coffee, especially strong coffee with sugar, a small amount can indeed be masked. Obenga thanked the doctor and went back to Melindy's house. This time, she brought a search warrant and 2 forensic technicians with her. Vesta had just returned from the lawyer when 3 police cars pulled up outside her house. She looked pale and confused when she opened the door for the detective. "Mrs. Melindy, we have a search warrant for your home," Obenga announced, handing her the document. "We are looking for possible sources of the poison that caused your husband's death." "Poison?" Vesta feigned surprise. "Are you saying that Cyrus was poisoned?" "The autopsy results showed the presence of potassium cyanide in your husband's body." Vesta let the police into the house and sat in the living room, watching as they methodically searched every room. The technicians checked the kitchen, bathrooms, storage room, and garage. They confiscated various household chemicals, medicines, and even silver polish. Detective Obenga personally inspected Cyrus's study and the couple's bedroom. In Vesta's nightstand drawer, she found prescriptions for antidepressants written 2 years ago. "Were you taking medication for depression?" she asked. "For a short time, after my mother died. But I haven't taken it for a long time, and I feel fine now." One of the technicians came out of the garage with several plastic bags. "Detective, look at this," he said, showing her the contents of one of the bags. Inside was a small glass jar with the remains of a white powder. "Where did you find this?" Obenga asked. "In the trash can, under other trash. Looks like someone tried to hide it among the regular waste." The detective showed the jar to Vesta. "Do you recognize this container?" Vesta looked closely at the jar, turning it over in her hands. "No, I've never seen it before. What could it be?" We'll check it in the lab. In the meantime, I'd like to ask you a few more questions. Obenga took out her tablet and opened a file with data. Mrs. Malindi, have you made any unusual purchases online in recent weeks? The usual purchases: clothes, cosmetics, household goods, nothing special. We checked your credit card and online order history. 3 weeks ago, you bought a jewelry cleaning kit from a chemical reagents website. It's a rather specific kit. Vesta froze for a moment, but quickly regained her composure. Oh yes, that's right. I have some of my mother's gold jewelry, and it has tarnished. I wanted to clean it. Where is the jewelry now? In the bedroom, in a box on the dressing table. The detective went upstairs and indeed found a box with jewelry. Some of it looked slightly tarnished. And where is the cleaning kit itself? I used it and threw it away. There was very little left. Obenga looked closely at Vesta. Something about her behavior alarmed the detective. 2 quick answers to difficult questions, 2 logical explanations for every piece of evidence. One more question, Mrs. Malindi. How long did you study the history of potassium cyanide purchases on the internet on your computer? Vesta turned pale. I don't understand what you're talking about. Our experts checked the browser history on your home computer. A month before your husband's death, you searched for information about poisons, their effects, and methods of application. You also researched websites where various chemicals could be purchased. That was research. I was reading detective novels and wanted to understand how realistic the descriptions of poisoning were. Which novels exactly? Vesta hesitated. Agatha Christie and other authors. I don't remember the exact titles. The detective closed her tablet and turned to the technicians. Have you finished the search? Yes. Everything that was seized is packed and ready to be sent to the lab. Good. Mrs. Malindi, I need you to come to the station for further questioning. Do I have to go? For now, it's voluntary, but I recommend that you cooperate. I also advise you to contact a lawyer. Vesta nodded, picked up her purse, and headed for the exit. In the car, following the police cars to the station, she thought about her situation. The detective clearly suspected her of murdering her husband. The evidence was mounting: cyanide in the trash can, internet searches, purchase of chemicals. But all of this was circumstantial evidence so far. The main thing was not to panic and to answer carefully. She still had a chance to convince the police of her innocence. But now that she knew about the will, the motive for the murder seemed even more dubious. Why would she kill her husband for $10,000? At the police station, she was taken to a small interrogation room with gray walls, a metal table, and 3 chairs. A clock hung on the wall, showing 2:30 in the afternoon. Detective Obenga sat down opposite her, turned on the tape recorder, and began the official interrogation procedure. Vesta answered the questions calmly, trying not to show her anxiety. She repeated her version of the events of Wednesday morning, explained the purchase of chemicals and her internet searches. But the detective continued to ask clarifying questions, and Vesta felt herself gradually getting tangled up in the details of her explanations. The interrogation lasted 2 hours. When it was over, Obenga said that Vesta could go home, but she had to stay in town and be available for further questions. Leaving the station, Vesta got into her car and sat motionless for a long time. Everything was falling apart. The inheritance was lost, the police suspected her of murder, and most importantly, she had committed a crime for absolutely nothing. 23 years of patience, planning, waiting for the right moment, and all for $10,000. Friday was rainy. Vesta woke up to the sound of raindrops drumming on the roof of the house that no longer belonged to her. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking that just yesterday morning her life had seemed predictable. Now every sound outside the window could mean the police were coming. The phone rang at 8:30. Detective Obenga asked her to come to the station at 10 o'clock for further questioning. The detective's voice sounded official, without a hint of yesterday's politeness. Vesta dressed in a strict dark blue suit. the same one she wore to important meetings at the office. She carefully fixed her hair and applied subtle makeup. If she was going to fight for her freedom today, she had to look respectable. On the way to the police station, she stopped at a cafe and ordered a coffee to go. The irony of the situation did not escape her. She was buying the same drink that had been used to murder her husband. Vesta took a sip and grimaced. The coffee was too bitter. At the station, she was met not only by Detective Obenga, but also by the prosecutor, a man in his 50s with a serious face and attentive eyes. He introduced himself as Daniel Rogers and explained that he was present at the interrogation in connection with possible charges. Mrs. Melindy, the detective began, laying out several photographs on the table. Yesterday we received the results of the analysis of the substance found in your trash can. It is potassium cyanide, the same substance that caused your husband's death. Vesta looked at the photographs of the glass jar and nodded. I already told you that I've never seen this container before. We also traced an online order for a set of chemical reagents. Among other things, this set contained potassium cyanide in an amount sufficient to make a lethal dose. I bought a jewelry cleaning kit. If there was cyanide in it, I didn't know about it. The prosecutor leaned forward. Mrs. Melindy, we have a history of your internet searches. 3 weeks before your husband's death, you carefully studied the properties of various poisons, including cyanide. You read about the symptoms of poisoning, the time it takes to work, and ways to mask the taste. I explained that it was for reading detective stories. What was the last detective novel you read? The detective asked quickly. Vesta hesitated. I don't remember exactly. I read a lot of different books. We checked your book purchases over the last few months. There are no detective novels among them. Obenga took out another folder of documents. Yesterday, we also spoke with your family's lawyer, Rashida Nkomo. She gave us some interesting information about your husband's will. Vesta tensed all the muscles in her face, trying to keep a neutral expression. It turns out that the day before his death, Cyrus changed his will. Now the heir is not you, but his nephew. Did you know about this? No, Vesta replied. Rashida only told me about the changes yesterday. But if you didn't know about it, why kill your husband? After all, under the old will, you would have inherited all his property. Vesta felt the ground slipping away from under her feet. The detective's logic was flawless. If she didn't know about the change in the will, then she had no motive for murder. And if she did know, then she killed her husband out of revenge, not for money. I didn't kill Cyrus, she said slowly. I loved him. Loved him? The detective repeated. Your neighbors talk about the cold relationship between you. Your husband's colleagues noted that he had been preoccupied with something in recent months, and your colleagues say that you never showed any emotion when talking about your husband. The prosecutor opened his folder. Mrs. Melindy, we have a motive, a $2.5 million inheritance. We have a murder weapon, cyanide, which you bought under the guise of jewelry cleaner. We have opportunity. You were the only one who made coffee that morning. But you just said yourself that the will had been changed, Vesta objected. If I knew about the changes, why would I kill my husband? And if I didn't know, where would the motive come from? The detective and the prosecutor exchanged glances. There is a third option, said Obenga. You found out about the change in the will and killed your husband out of revenge, or you killed him before he had a chance to make the changes official. But the lawyer says the documents were signed on Tuesday and Cyrus died on Wednesday. Perhaps you planned the murder for Monday or Tuesday, but something got in the way. Or maybe you found out about your husband's plans to change the will and decided to act quickly. A young police officer entered the interrogation room and whispered something in the detective's ear. Obenga nodded and left the room, leaving Vesta alone with the prosecutor. Mrs. Melindy, Rogers said softly, I've been handling criminal cases for 25 years. I've seen many people who have done terrible things for very human reasons. No one is born a murderer. Vesta remained silent, staring at the table. If you tell the truth, the court will take that into account. You may be able to avoid life imprisonment. I have nothing to tell. I didn't kill my husband. The detective returned 10 minutes later. With her was a young African-American man in jeans and a plaid shirt, tall, thin, with attentive eyes behind his glasses. Mrs. Malindi, meet Stiller Kufo, your late husband's nephew. Vesta looked up at the young man. He really did look like Cyrus. The same cheekbones, the same slanted eyes, only younger and with a softer expression. Stiller just found out about his uncle's death and the changes to the will, the detective continued. He's ready to answer our questions. Stiller sat down on a chair next to the prosecutor, his eyes fixed on Vesta. Aunt Vesta, he said, his voice filled with sincere sadness. I can't believe Uncle Cyrus is dead, and I can't believe the police suspect you of his murder. Stiller, the detective addressed him. When was the last time you spoke with your uncle? About 2 weeks ago. He called me in the evening and we talked for about 40 minutes. He asked about my work and my plans for the future. What else did you talk about? My uncle asked if I needed financial help. He offered to help with the down payment on an apartment. I refused. I'm not used to borrowing money. Did he mention any problems in his marriage? Stiller glanced at Vesta, who was sitting tensely, her hands clenched. Not directly, but I sensed that he was worried about something. My uncle usually called on weekends when Aunt Vesta was home, but this time he called late in the evening on a weekday and spoke very quietly, as if he didn't want anyone to hear. What exactly was bothering him? He said he was rethinking his life, that sometimes the people you think are close to you turn out to be not who you thought they were. And then he added that if anything happened to him, I should know that he always considered me his son. Silence hung in the room. Vesta felt her pulse quicken. Did he say anything specific about Aunt Vesta? The detective continued. No, but I understood that he was talking about family problems. My uncle wasn't the type of person to complain about his personal life, so his call surprised me. The prosecutor leaned toward Stiller. How did you feel about becoming the heir to your uncle's estate? I was shocked. I didn't even know my uncle had a will. I thought Aunt Vesta would inherit everything. And now I don't know what to do with this inheritance. What do you mean? If Aunt Vesta is innocent of my uncle's death, it's unfair that she's left with nothing. I'm willing to share the inheritance equally. Vesta looked up at him. A glimmer of hope flashed in her eyes. But if it turns out that she really did kill Uncle Cyrus? Stiller shook his head. Then I don't want anything to do with her. The detective left the room with Stiller, leaving Vesta alone with the prosecutor again. Time is against you, Mrs. Malindi, Rogers said. The evidence is mounting. Witnesses are testifying. Expert reports confirm our version of events. You have one last chance to tell your side of the story. Vesta remained silent. Various explanations flashed through her mind, but each of them was easily refuted by the facts gathered by the police. The detective returned half an hour later with a new folder of documents. Mrs. Malindi, we checked your phone calls for the last few weeks. An interesting circumstance has come to light. On Monday, 2 days before your husband's death, you called Nkomo's law office. The conversation lasted 7 minutes. Vesta felt her heart sink. I wanted to arrange a meeting to update our will. But the lawyer says you asked if Cyrus had scheduled a meeting for this week, and when you found out he had, you asked to reschedule the meeting for a later date. I don't remember exactly what I said. But we remember, because the lawyer keeps records of all phone conversations with clients. You tried to prevent your husband from changing his will. The prosecutor opened another folder, and here are the bank records. A week before your husband's death, you withdrew $5,000 in cash from your personal account. That's a large amount for everyday expenses. I wanted to buy Cyrus a birthday present. It was a month away. What kind of gift costs $5,000? A watch, a Swiss watch. Where is that gift now? Vesta hesitated. I didn't get around to buying it yet. So you have $5,000 in cash at home? Yes. We searched your house. We didn't find any large amounts of cash. Vesta realized she was caught. Each of her explanations raised new questions she couldn't answer. Mrs. Melindy, said the detective, taking another document out of her folder, I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of first-degree murder of Cyrus Melindy. Vesta closed her eyes. The game was over. I want a lawyer, she said quietly. That's your right. But first, I have to read you your rights. The detective stood up and began to recite the familiar formula. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in a court of law. Vesta listened to these words and thought about how carefully she had planned the crime. She had studied the chemical properties of poisons, looked for ways to acquire them, and thought through her alibi. But she hadn't taken one thing into account, that Cyrus might change his will at the last minute. 23 years of marriage, 23 years of waiting, and in the end, nothing. She didn't even have her freedom anymore. She was led down the hallway of the police station, photographed, fingerprinted, and her personal belongings were taken away. In the holding cell, Vesta sat down on a narrow cot and looked out the small window at the rain falling outside. Tomorrow, a new life would begin, the life of a woman accused of murder, and in a few months, perhaps the life of a convicted woman. Stiller would receive his inheritance, Detective Obenga would close the case, and the prosecutor would add another victory to his record. And she, Vesta Melindy, who had been a model wife for 23 years and had never broken the law, would spend the rest of her days in a prison cell for a crime that brought her nothing but destruction.